Until recently, I lived with my parents in a private house not far from the city. They had always been strict and difficult, so we rarely had guests. The only friend they could tolerate, even a little, was Leoka. I'd known him since first grade, and he was probably the only person I could trust in a difficult situation. Unlike my parents, who preferred to scold me for my mistakes rather than teach me not to make them, Leoka was always ready to help and offer advice. He had far more life experience than I did. He'd been working since he was 14 after his father left, and he even managed to date girls. I envied him, of course, but not in a malicious way. Rather, I was happy for his success on all fronts. He wasn't so lucky with one thing. His mother was an alcoholic. Half of her allowance she drank away, and with the other half, she bought Leoka food. Still, he had something I didn't in my childhood: freedom. A year after he turned 18, she passed away, and Leoka inherited the apartment. A week ago, he came to visit me in the evening. My parents had gone to the theater, so the house was ours for the next 3 hours. We weren't even thinking about parties. We knew how that could turn out. There was no point in having one at Leoka's apartment either. Despite being 19, my father was dead set against me staying anywhere overnight. So, my friend's idea of buying an inexpensive apartment on the outskirts of the city was very appealing to me. My parents weren't stingy with pocket money, and I was good at saving, putting most of it aside for better times. I doubt I can buy a decent place with this, I said. You can, Leoka smiled. Not just decent, but new, in a new development. Funny, my voice sounded upset. I'm serious, Leoka said firmly. I've got it all figured out. Our neighbor did this a long time ago and is living happily now. Your money is definitely enough for an apartment in an old 5-story building on the outskirts. It was built back in Soviet times. The builders poorly leveled the foundation, and a crack formed along the wall. Then mold appeared, and the heating broke down. The building was declared unsafe and scheduled for demolition, and the residents would be rehoused in new buildings. You're suggesting I live in a dump that could collapse on my head at any moment? I asked, annoyed. Stop it, Leoka cut me off. You'll only live there for less than a month. It won't collapse, but you'll definitely get relocated for free. You'll get a 2-room apartment in a new development. How's that for motivation? I told him I'd think about it and give him my decision the next day. I needed to discuss everything with my parents and mentally prepare for the purchase if they agreed. The conversation was long, and I presented a ton of arguments for the purchase, explaining Leoka's plan several times. After a considerable amount of time, my mother finally supported my idea, and then my father did too, though he probably just wanted me to leave them alone. But I didn't care, I was happy. The next day, I went to Leoka's. He showed me a for sale ad he'd found online a few days ago. They were asking for slightly less than the amount I had saved. The seller turned out to be a decent young guy, a bit older than Leoka and me. He'd inherited the apartment from a grandmother he'd never known, so he had no emotional attachment to the place and put it up for sale the day after inheriting it. The apartment was on the 4th floor. The iron door stood out against the peeling and graffitied walls. But inside, it wasn't a better sight. It smelled as if stray cats had spent their best years here. The wallpaper was peeling in places, and instead of a chandelier in the hallway, there was one dim light bulb. The kitchen window was cracked in the bottom corner. Thankfully, it was summer, so surviving 2 weeks here didn't mean freezing to death. The large room had a balcony, an old television, and a sofa where the grandmother had died. We immediately folded it up and covered it with a sheet. We weren't particularly superstitious, but we didn't want to sit where someone had died. The second room had a wardrobe, a bed, and a nightstand. Well, you can live here, Leoka smiled. Maybe I'll just stay with you? I asked. After all, the apartment is registered to me, which means I'll be relocated anyway. About that, Leoka stammered, I'm not living alone. Remember Lizka from the parallel class? Everything became clear. I would have to live here. At least there were all the conveniences. The iron door protected me reliably from the outside world. And my conscience wouldn't allow me to go stay with my parents, nor did I particularly want to see the expression on my father's face if he saw his son helpless and unprepared for independent life. In the evening, we moved my things from my parents' house, and Leoka went home for dinner. All I had for dinner was tap water, so I decided to go to the store. The 5-story building was set a little apart from the other houses, so the walk to the store took a considerable amount of time. When I returned, it was dark outside. The streetlights by my building were on, and I noticed a silhouette. Hesitantly, I decided to approach. "Who are you?" the silhouette asked in a woman's voice. "I live here," I replied, turning away from the entrance door. The silhouette put out a cigarette and approached me. It was a woman of medium height, middle-aged, well-preserved for her age, but with a smoky voice. "Ludmilla," she extended her hand. "Sergey," I replied. "And how long have you been here, Sergey?" "I moved in today. And you're never going to leave here," Ludmilla said, talking to herself. "The bureaucrats think they can easily kick us out of here. They promise new apartments, but at best, they'll give us a cot in a dormitory." She started talking more. "But not here. I'd rather live here, even if that crack goes right across the apartment." "Do a lot of people live here?" I asked out of politeness. "No, just me and Boris Anatolievich. He used to serve in the Navy. They gave him this apartment for his years of service. Then his whole family died in a car accident. So he's the only one left, living on the 5th floor." We talked for a couple more minutes until another silhouette appeared from the dark courtyard. His back was straight, and his steps firm, but a limp in one leg and heavy breathing gave away the old man. "Meet him, Seryozhenka, Boris Anatolievich," Ludmilla nodded toward the silhouette. The man stepped into the light. He was an elderly man with gray hair and a mustache. I extended my hand, but there was no response. His eyes betrayed anxiety. He was clearly worried about something, but I didn't ask. "Don't open the door at night," the old man said strictly. "The door?" I repeated. The old man didn't answer and silently hurried up the stairs. Ludmilla and I exchanged glances. There were no answers, so after a while, we went our separate ways home. I don't know why, but the request about the door bothered me a little. For the night, I locked the iron door on all turns, as well as the door to my room, the latter with a small latch. I couldn't fall asleep for a long time. Different thoughts crept into my head, and the new place had an effect. Plus, the old man wouldn't leave my mind. Probably senility, I thought, and calmed down. During the night, I was woken by a thud from the apartment above, as if something heavy was being moved around. Then heavy footsteps, another thud, and the last straw was something glass breaking on the floor. I got out of bed and tapped the watch strap on the battery. The thud stopped. The rest of the night passed peacefully. In the morning, before going to the institute, I met Ludmilla near the entrance and politely asked about the apartment above me. She smiled and replied, "Boris Anatolievich's apartment. Senility, for sure. An extreme stage, he's moving things around," I thought and, smiling at Ludmilla, went to school. The day passed as usual. After classes, I stopped by Leoka's, met Liza, and stayed there until evening. I returned home late. Under the streetlights near the entrance, a silhouette stood again. "How was your day, Ludmilla?" I smiled at my neighbor. She didn't answer but just looked at me with a frightened gaze. "Did something happen?" I asked. "Seryoz, I don't know," her voice trembled. Stammering with fear, she continued. "I just got back from work, was standing here smoking, and then suddenly I look at my window, and the light turned on." She swallowed and exhaled. "And then, suddenly, it turned off. Maybe someone is there? Come on," I smiled. "The house is older than both of us. The wiring is just acting up. Do you want me to go check?" "If it's not too much trouble, Seryoz," she said, calming down a little, and handed me the keys. How I cursed myself for this, but it was too late to back down. I had pepper spray with me, which gave me a little confidence. The door to Ludmilla's apartment was closed. With a trembling hand, I opened the door and quickly turned on the light in the hallway. No one. I checked the kitchen, then the living room, and the bedroom. Empty. I didn't feel like going back downstairs, so I decided to shout out the window to Ludmilla. She happily looked up and came into the entrance. She offered tea and to sit with her, but I politely declined and went to my room. About an hour passed. I was sitting at my laptop watching a TV series. The window was fully open, and I could hear everything happening outside, be it the voices of passers-by or the sounds of cars driving somewhere far away. Suddenly, I heard a scream, a woman's scream. I jumped up from my seat and looked out the window. No one. Another scream. Now I understood. The screams were coming from our building. Everything clicked in my head. My whole body shook as if it had become one large piece of ice for a moment, and then a warm, ringing horror gripped it. Only Ludmilla could be screaming, I thought, but who could harm her? Her husband? Does she even have one? She's 40 and single. Maybe an ex-husband? And if she didn't open the door, where was she? I froze for a second. My eyes widened so much that they seemed about to pop out. My breathing stopped. I hadn't checked the bathroom. The thought crashed into my mind and left its mark. The stupor receded, and I grabbed my phone and hid behind the curtain to see who came out of the entrance and, if necessary, identify the criminal to the police. The dispatcher said that a unit was already on its way and would be there soon. The police car arrived in 10 minutes. During that time, no one came out of the entrance. 3 police officers ran into the house, and 1 stayed outside. I waved to him and gave him the apartment number so they could take my testimony. There was a knock at the door. It was 2 officers. They wrote down everything I told them, and then invited me into the apartment. Lidmila lay in the bathroom. A bloody trail ran from the bathtub to the kitchen window. She probably wanted to call for help or escape. The cause of death was not immediately determined. There were no wounds. Blood oozed from her mouth, and her fingernails were broken as if she had fought someone before she died. According to the police, the door had to be forced open, which meant the culprit had access to the apartment. The investigators' assumption was that the killer left the building through the attic and exited through another door that led towards the forest and was on the opposite side of the house from my window. It was unbearable to spend the night alone. I called Leoka and asked him to come over. Leoka, reluctantly, arrived. Liza was staying at her own place tonight, so there was nothing holding him back. By the way, I didn't tell the police about the crazy old man upstairs. What was the point? They'd start interrogating him, and he'd just move a nightstand in front of them, I thought. The night passed as usual. Around 4 o'clock, I heard the familiar thud and a quiet voice, and then another crash of something glass against the wall and loud footsteps, as if the old man was jumping in place. 5 minutes later, everything quieted down, and I fell asleep. In the morning, Leoka shared his impressions after staying over. Not only did you make me sleep on the floor, and I couldn't fall asleep because of that, he said, but some old man kept waking me up with his jumping in the middle of the night. You heard it too? I smiled. That's my neighbor upstairs, the crazy old man. Neighbor upstairs? So you have a psycho old man living here, and you made me come to your place in the middle of the night and go up a dark staircase? What if he killed the woman? I flinched. Thoughts began to creep into my head. How he came down to her, opened the door, hid in the bathroom, and waited until the defenseless woman was home alone and decided to take a shower after a hard day's work. Stop it, I said. He's barely breathing, he's even less capable of murder. The day flew by quickly. There were only 2 classes, so I returned home early. Lidmila's brother was at her apartment. I met him on the landing and asked about Lidmila's family. He told me she had no family and never had, she just had bad luck in life. He lived in another city and only came for his sister's funeral. I spent the rest of the day at home, watching a TV series. I went to bed early, my mood was bad. At night, I was woken again by noise from above. This time, there was more frequent and louder jumping, as if trying to break through the floor with their feet. Somehow, I managed to fall asleep. I woke up very early. Leoka's words kept going through my head. Could the old man really be capable of something like that? Finally, I decided to call the police. The unit arrived an hour later. They lectured me for not immediately telling them about all the residents of the house and even threatened me with a suspended sentence. When I told them about the old man and my suspicions, the investigator decided to question the old man immediately. They told me to go with them. They knocked on the door for a long time. Boris didn't open. Then the investigator decided to break down the door. It was wooden. Behind the door was a well-maintained apartment. Portraits of Boris Anatolievich and his family hung on the wall. But the old man himself was nowhere to be found. The bedroom door was closed. The investigator knocked. Silence. Then he ordered the officer to break down that door too. The last barrier flew off its hinges, and he entered the room. The pale, bald, and thin body of Boris Anatolievich sat in an armchair in front of a huge mirror. Around him lay his gray hair, which had either been pulled from his head or he had pulled himself, and shards of something glass. The old man's bloodshot eyes were open and looked at the reflection of the door in the mirror. He was looking directly at us. The investigator called an ambulance, and the old man was taken away. I stayed home. I didn't go to the university. I called Leoka, but he didn't answer. I felt lonely and creepy. For the night, I locked all the doors and windows, went to bed with the lamp on, and somehow fell asleep. Dawn broke. I opened my eyes, stared at the ceiling, and thought. Suddenly, a thud from above, jumping, and fast running around the apartment. Now he's jogging in the mornings, I thought. The realization of the situation came a couple of seconds later. I jumped out of bed and dialed the police. Time dragged on. The noise died down, and I heard a police car pull up to the building. They searched the apartment, no one. I gathered my laptop, money, and passport. The policeman agreed to stay with me until I left, so I got dressed very quickly. In all the horror, I even forgot where I threw my cell phone, so I had to call it from the landline, which I had never used before. On the way, the investigator told me the results of the old man's autopsy. It turned out he had been dead for at least 3 days. That meant he was killed the day he told us about the doors and left. I stayed at his place until evening while he was at the institute. When he got home, we decided to bring 3 of our friends and pick up my remaining things from the apartment. The streetlights began to turn on as we approached the house, and that was a bad idea to go in the evening. As we approached the house, I looked at my windows. The light turned on for a moment and then went out. I almost fainted. I don't remember how we got home. I just remember shouting at everyone to go back, away from that house. Now I live with Leoka, waiting for the house to be demolished. Recently, I discovered missed calls from my landline in my apartment. I threw away the SIM card along with the cell phone. It's not my problem anymore.